Welcome to Infertility and Me podcast, a show that amplifies diverse stories about the struggles of infertility and fertility in a safe space. Our goal is to normalize fertility stories that validate, give hope, and create a community where no one is left silently suffering. Thank you guys so much for being here with me. It's your host, Monique Farouk, here at the Infertility and Me podcast. If this is your first time, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of your day and for listening and hitting that play button. And also make sure that you guys are subscribed and or following the podcast on YouTube or your favorite audio platform. You can find me on Instagram at Infertility and Me podcast as well for more content and just to connect and get to know each other a little bit more. But I'm going to get right into it. I do not want to hold you guys long. And so today we have a very special guest, an author and a published author, that is Miss Kimberly Gowdy. She is the author of a book called The Colorless Womb. Kimberly always yearned for a child, but after 7 miscarriages, 3 failed surrogacy attempts, and 2 embryos left, she and her husband received an unexpected blessing. The twist: Kimberly is black and her surrogate is white, and they live in the South. Kimberly is the author of The Colorless Womb. You can find that book at thecolorlesswomb.com as well as Amazon, which details her surrogacy and infertility story. Also created a support group called MOBY, capital MOBY, Mommy Older, Baby Younger, a support group for mothers 35 and over. And you guys make sure that you check that out if you fit into that category or just need some extra support. But in her book, The Colorless Womb, she tackles infertility, surrogacy, and racial societal pressures of parenthood, dealing with ignorant comments from friends and family like, is your baby going to be white? Or, it took a white woman to save you? The problem was that Kimberly searched high and low for a surrogate that looked like her, but all fell short in the health area. And so today is with us her entire story and is advocating really for surrogacy and for maybe considering going outside of your own racial background in order to conceive and have a family or expand your already existing family. And I think it's a really great thing that she's done by writing and preparing this book, because as the world continues to change, as couples experiment with multiple multiracial relationships and such, these conversations are going to be more and more prevalent. And it's a conversation that we should all have with our spouses when we're trying to conceive, is that if it ever came to this and we are financially stable enough to be able to go down the route of surrogacy, would we be open to a woman who is not from the same racial makeup, from either or none of you? And in Kimberly's case, her and her husband are both African American and their surrogate is white. And so I hope that you guys will enjoy today's episode. I'm sure that you will, and it will help you to open your eyes to another path. Or if you know someone who's currently seeking a surrogate, maybe pass them this episode so that they can learn more about Kimberly and her story and her journey to motherhood through surrogacy from a multiracial surrogacy journey. And we'll be back in just a second with Kimberly. Thank you and welcome back to another episode of Infertility and Me. We are right back with our guest, Ms. Kimberly Gowdy. Thank you, Kimberly, so much for coming onto the show and sharing your very unique story to motherhood through surrogacy. And I know that you have suffered quite a few losses in the past as well, but we'll get into that later. But just thank you. Thank you so much for representing for all of us survivors of the infertility community and especially us brown girls.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I certainly appreciate it. Absolutely.
My pleasure. The pleasure is all mine. So I usually ask everybody how they met their spouses. So how did you and hubby meet?
Oh boy, that's interesting. Well, one, hubby is it's a second marriage. Okay, this is, it's a second marriage, and we met. I needed a physician. I had an ear infection, and so I met him at his office. I went in, and I was a patient. Initially, of course, there was, no connection with us at all, but I guess over time, the way that things worked out, we ultimately started having conversations, and yeah, the rest is history, as they say. Yeah, so that's how we met. I was his
Oh,
patient.
that's so unique. I love it. Everything about your story is so unique from the beginning to now, right? I love that though.
Unique,
I love
right?
that. It's an unconventional way of, yeah, it's an unconventional way that you wouldn't normally think about. You like you see it in movies, but you don't I don't think I've ever met anybody who actually met their spouse because their spouse was their physician first. So that's really cool. I love that. I love it. I love it. I love unique stories like that. So, oh my gosh, you guys, what year did you guys get married? How long ago did you guys get married?
Oh, we got married in 2007. Yeah,
Okay,
so
okay. So you guys been together
yeah,
for almost 2 decades. Wow. Yeah. I
yeah,
met my husband right after you guys met, so kind of right behind you in that sense.
yeah,
So did you
yeah.
always feel like you wanted to be a mom? Is that something that you always wanted, that you always saw for yourself, especially after you guys got
Absolutely.
married, you know?
Yeah. I tell you, I mean, that's just something that I just always, you just figure like that's just the natural progression in life, that,
Hmm.
you are going to meet the person of your dreams, you're going to have children. So my entire life, I've always wanted to be a mom. I'm from a large family. And so I just assumed that that would just be an easy thing. My mom
Hmm.
had 6 children. So it's just, hey, it's no big deal. But for me, didn't really work out that way.
Yeah, yeah. So when after you guys got married and everything, when did you decide to start trying to conceive? Or didn't you said you had been married before? You didn't have any children from the previous marriage, right?
No, no children from the previous marriage, but I will tell you I had several losses from the previous marriage, a number of losses. Um, I getting pregnant for me, because infertility is not just like, like you can't get pregnant, but it's also the inability to carry a child to full
Exactly.
term. And
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
I was diagnosed with an incompetent cervix. But
Mm.
unfortunately, in order to get that diagnosis, you're well along in your pregnancy. So I was in close to my 6 month of pregnancy, and I lost my son.
Oh
And
wow.
so it's needless to say, the devastation of that was just, it was horrific. So that happened, and that's when, I'd had early miscarriages, and you cannot, disregard those early losses. Some people will say, oh, well, you were only 8 weeks, you're only 9 weeks, but you are already in love when you find out, when you see that plus sign, or, you're pregnant, or you get information from the doctor. You're already so excited that it doesn't matter if you're 6 weeks, 5 weeks, it didn't matter. So, um, I've gotten those types of early on, we thought I
Mm-hmm.
know it was positive, but, that didn't work out.
Yeah.
And so I'd gotten those previously. And then to get to this pregnancy where, oh, what is this? 3 months? I'm past the mark of, everyone says, that after 12, you don't need to worry about it as much anymore. And so to get to 20 plus weeks in a pregnancy, and it doesn't work out, um, that was just absolutely devastating. So, again, I've always wanted to be a mom. My losses came, all of my losses came during my first marriage. And I think that between that and some other, issues that
Of
we
course.
had, that I
Mm-hmm.
actually outline slightly in my book,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
that just was a recipe for a disastrous ending to our marriage. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, it's a lot more common than people think
Yeah,
when you go through that with a spouse. It's the trauma is what really tears you apart. Um,
exactly.
and yeah. So. Wow, there's so much grief there, and I empathize deeply for your losses. And I went into preterm labor myself at around 24
Mm,
weeks,
mm.
23 weeks. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
So
same as me.
I know
Yeah,
the trauma. I know the trauma, and it's becoming more apparent to me as I continue the podcast how many of I can count so many women of color who have been on the podcast who have suffered from preterm loss and or had a really early baby that was born and survived or didn't and he lost the baby, you know. So
yeah,
it's the statistics are a lot of people hate to look at the statistics, but they're real and they're kind of quite accurate from what I'm seeing and who I'm coming into
yeah.
contact with, you know, through the space of infertility and medical conditions. So
And I
it's
am sorry to hear that
mm,
for you. I am absolutely sorry that you have gone through that, but you absolutely understand what I mean when I talk about the
mm-hmm,
way that it. I I would literally, think about after the loss, getting in my car and like driving into a tree. Like the
mm,
pain of it all was so bad because you're holding this child. Like I had to deliver the child, and
yeah,
then I'm
yeah,
holding this baby, and the devastation was just, I cannot even,
mm-hmm. It's no
explain.
words.
It's the
Yeah.
worst. And then for me, a year later, I found myself back in that situation again. Well, I went
Mm,
to first it's 6 months, and I went to the fifth month, and that was after having a cerclage. They called it
yeah,
like a stitch
yeah,
to
yeah.
keep your
Keep it
cervix
closed. Yeah.
closed. I had the cerclage, and I still went into labor and lost a little
Mm.
boy, a second
Another
son.
boy. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, it's just absolute devastation.
Yeah. And so when you got married with your husband, I'm sure you were very upfront about your condition of having the incompetent cervix and such. At that
Yeah.
point, had your medical practitioners and specialists had they begin to take your case more seriously in helping you to maintain the pregnancies, or were they just giving you other options like surrogacy? Because of course your story ends with the surrogacy and everything.
Yeah. So in my situation, when I met my husband, once we decided we were, going to be a couple getting married, um, I have to say, one minute we were talking about getting married, then 5 months later we were engaged, and immediately we were married. And I will say that, in my situation, I didn't, because of my age at the
Mm-hmm.
time, like being late 30s, I just thought, what, that ship had sailed. So I never really
Mm.
talked to my husband about like what I had gone through in terms of children, because I never really thought that that would be something that would come up. My husband, he had two daughters who were grown ups at that point. They had graduated from college already. And
Okay.
so I never even thought, like, hey, we will live our lives, and my story is this, just that I will never become a mom and we'll move on. And so it was rather surprising to me that he was the one to mention children. And at that
Mm.
point, here I was having to explain to him, my
All the things.
situation,
Yeah.
and him being a physician and knowing a lot of people in the community, like, the physicians, and that the whole, in
The
that
reproductive care and
yeah,
all
that
that.
whole,
Yeah.
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 He knew like the right people. And so them, getting my records and looking over everything, um, we did go through trying again, like, going through IVF and saying, hey, like, hey, we can do the stitch a different way and we can do whatever. But what ended up happening was, when we did do the first round of IVF,
Hmm.
it it came the test came back negative. And
Okay.
I will tell you, I was very happy that it was negative, even
Mm.
though I did want
Mm.
to be a mom. What was more painful to me was having to go through possibly being 5, 6 months pregnant and then losing the child. that
Yeah,
type
you're
of pain. I
passionate.
didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
go. Yes, I didn't
Yeah.
want to go through it. So it was me who I said to my husband, I can't do this. I know you're sad that it was negative, but I need to be honest with you. I need to be honest with myself that
That's
I'm
good.
not
That's good.
disappointed that it was negative. And I thought at that point we could look into adoption. That was
Mm-hmm.
the road that I wanted to take, was adoption, especially when it comes to you know, children of, Black children,
Of color. Yeah.
especially,
Yeah. Yeah.
needing homes. I just thought that that would be the best thing to do. And ultimately, in doing that search for adoption, we stumbled upon surrogacy.
And when you say stumbled, was it something that you weren't really cognizant about before? Had it just never crossed your mind, right?
Never crossed my mind,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
surrogacy, like who do we even know what that's done surrogacy? Who's
Right.
even doing
Exactly.
that? Like, that's not something that's
And
every
who's doing
day.
it in the Black community?
Yes. So,
Let's be honest.
who's doing it? Yeah. And I'm glad you said that. Who's doing that? Like, no one that I know has ever done that. And so it wasn't even something I thought of. But because we had gone to the doctors regarding the IVF, you, of course, in order to do that, you have to go through the creating the embryos and doing that whole thing. Getting the embryos for the implantation for the pregnancy that we chose to do
Yeah.
previously. Well, the once the attorney for who was going to head the adoption, once she
Gotcha.
realized that, hey, you guys have embryos, I know you're here for adoption, but
Mm,
you could consider surrogacy because it would still be your own body, but someone else
exactly.
would carry the
Exactly.
child.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
called.
that's how
They call
we
it. What do they call it?
gestational
The gestational carrier. You share
gestational
epigenetics.
surrogacy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Hmm.
epigenetics is. Oh, wow. Wow. And so
So
your
yeah,
lawyer, were they rehearsed in dealing with fertility? Were they a lawyer? There's lawyers that specialize in reproductive
yeah.
care cases and such.
She
Okay.
this particular attorney, she was going to help us with adoption. Like she
Mm-hmm.
was going to go through the all the ins and outs regarding adoption, and that's why we had spoken to her to begin with. And so we
Yeah,
had
she
no
knew
idea
about all
that
that
she
stuff. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
she was
She's
all
really
versed in
knowledgeable. Yeah.
everything. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
that's how we got into the surrogacy. It's kind of so stumbled upon was just the word to use
Yes, I love that.
because
I love the way you describe it though,
oh,
because I feel like
oh, oops,
we stumble upon infertility too, because unless we have a
yeah,
condition pre-existing to trying to conceive, like
exactly.
endometriosis, that can be
Hmm.
diagnosed as teenagers and such, or PCOS even, we don't. Infertility, what is that? That's exactly what my
Yeah,
mom said.
yeah,
Infertility, what do you mean?
fertility.
Like
Yeah,
I've heard of it, but you don't
exactly.
really know
Yep,
exactly what it all entails. So
yeah,
yeah, I
so
understand,
true.
girl. I
Exactly.
understand. So did you guys go through with the adoption, or did you just start to begin to research more about the surrogacy? How did that work out?
Well, we didn't go forward with adoption because after she mentioned this, my husband was very interested, I'll say, in
Mm,
that option. I was not. And the
mm,
reason I wasn't, and I just to tell people, when you think of becoming a mom, I always dreamt of, oh, the baby kicked. Oh, the
hmm.
beauty of, oh my
The
goodness,
whole
push.
experience.
You need
Yeah.
to push. You need to that whole thing. And so to go to a surrogate was basically telling the entire world that, in my mind, failure, she can't
Yeah.
do it. It took so much for, a lot of conversations, a lot of arguments, a lot of tears, back and forth before I got comfortable with doing this. And my husband, he was like, whatever time you need to get to this point. And if you never get to that point, I'm okay. And I ultimately said, okay. And it was a conversation. I'm in a sorority. And it was a conversation that I had with one of my, actually it was someone who was in a different sorority, but she was the person, and I always give her credit for this, because I contacted her and I was just talking about this whole thing about surrogacy and how, I felt like a failure, and, why would I do that? And everybody would know, and I didn't carry the child. And she's like, if you needed like a heart and you needed, and someone was going to do a transplant, like, would you accept it if it was going to help you live? Like, people who need organ donations, or, like, why would it be any different that this person is helping you with something that, like my, obviously my uterus just is not working, or my cervix is not working the way that it should. And so I need help. And when she said that, I was like, okay. I received it, and I told my husband that we could move forward. And so
I love
that
the way
was
she
it.
described it. I've never heard anybody describe it that way, and it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
And which I'm glad that you brought that up, because I'm sure there may be someone listening who may be deciding that right now. Surrogacy is
Yeah,
becoming so much more common, and
yeah,
especially with Black and brown women and such. So it's an option. If you can afford it financially, it's an option and it's there. So
yeah.
you make the decision. And what was the process like with you deciding who your surrogate would be?
Oh, well,
I know it was long.
once
I know it was
once
hard too.
it's years. And
Yeah.
so there was like, you doing the surrogacy piece of it, like, I'm so new at this, I don't know what to do with this whole thing, but I know we're going to do surrogacy. So of course I go online, and of course there are agencies that you can go
Hmm.
through for surrogacy. And in all honesty, if I had to do it again, I probably would have maybe chosen an agency. Like,
Okay.
it's a
They
steep
really
fee.
walk you through, right?
But yeah, but so what I did was like, hey, I got this, I can look into it. But and it's a long process, and there are literally people who are out there in the whole world of surrogacy who can, they're like advertising or just saying, like, you can put in, she lives here, she's had a number of children, she has done this before, like what they charge, the whole nine.
Hmm.
And so you're getting all of that information. So I found a person, to help us with this. And in all honesty, I wanted to kind of live vicariously through this person. So I wanted her to be a
Mm.
Black woman. She,
Okay.
like, that was
Yeah.
my thing. Like, I'm a Black woman. I just wanted my surrogate to be a Black woman. I'm going to go through this with me, go through
Yeah.
it with me. And ultimately, though, after going through 3 different surrogates, and this is over years, because through surrogacy, you have to do the background check piece of it, where your attorney comes in. You have to do the emotional piece of it, where the psychologist comes in, and you have to do the physical piece of it, which is where the reproductive endocrinologist comes in. So, and none of this is in network. You're not paying, no insurance is paying for
Exactly.
this. So you're
Exactly.
having to do, you want to make sure she's not, a fugitive. You got to make
For
sure that her,
sure.
mentally she's okay, and then you got to make sure physically she's okay. And so you're paying out of pocket to all 3 of these professions to do that. And we did that with 3 different people over years, because you have to actually find the person, get to know the person, kind of talk it through that you want to go forward with it. And so it's a lot. And that's why I say I probably would have used an agency to kind of do that, because they've already vetted the person, and they've done all that. So I had to do that myself. And I liken it to like online dating, like when you're going to these apps or whatever, and you're like saying, hey, is he does he fit the criteria? When you first meet the person, it's just kind of like, oh, okay, so, what do you do for a living? You're just having that conversation like you met somebody online. And so that's kind of how it is. But ultimately that didn't work at all for any three of these women. And then the Colorless Womb, which is, my book and my story, has to do with the fact that after I had done all of my interviewing and research and tried to find the person, it never worked out for me. And then ultimately the surrogate that ended up being perfect for us was someone that my attorney, who, from which I could have pretty much talked to her from the very beginning before I started doing all my searches. She had a person that she knew, and she ended up not looking anything like me, not being anything like me. She was white and her name was Heidi. And so that ended up being our surrogate to carry my son. Yeah. And she was very proud and very happy to do it, which is the reason I wrote my book, is because of the surrogacy piece, highlighting infertility, but also highlighting the fact that with so much division and negativity going on in terms of race in our country and in our world, that's not everybody. It's just not. And, so for this woman named Heidi, like I always tell her, like that is like the whitest name ever, Heidi, other than Becky. It's like for her to do this, to bring us into the world, is a selfless thing for anyone. And then someone of a different race, it's a very special thing. So, I'm very proud of my story, pertaining to the surrogacy piece and how it happened.
Received quite a lot of backlash from certain family members who were very close to you and concerned about your mental well-being and your emotional state as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That must have been really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the oldest of six children. Well, six girls,
Wow.
and all of them had children. And so, they were really concerned about the fact that, like when I was going through all the losses, and like I'm sure like with anyone going through the number of losses that I'd gone through, they were very concerned about, mentally, like me being
Mm-hmm.
okay. And then especially after I'd gone through a divorce and having gone through all of that, they were really concerned about whether or not I was okay. So that really, as the oldest in my family, and a lot of people who are children who are the oldest of all the kids, you feel like ones, they come to you. Like it's almost
Mm-hmm.
as if
Mm-hmm.
you're the leadership, so to speak. So you don't really go to them with your problems. They come to you with their problems. So I never really shared anything, but because they could actually see all of the pain and all of the loss in my life, that that had a lot. They were very concerned. I had a younger sister, like she was actually my youngest sister. She offered to carry my child for me. She
Mm-hmm.
wrote me a letter. She couldn't even like tell me. I just received the letter and she told
Mm-hmm.
me, and I still have it. Like she wrote me this
Wow.
letter and said,
Wow.
if you want me to carry the child. And so yeah, and in terms of like backlash came from the person that whom I chose as my surrogate. That
Mm-hmm.
came with a lot of backlash, because people who didn't know my background, who didn't know my
Mm-hmm.
full story, that we had gone through three other people to get to this one surrogate, they thought that I had just chosen someone who, like, oh, like, was I not like a black woman? Was she not good enough to carry your child?
Right.
Like, are
Right.
you kidding me? And so that came with some backlash from a couple of people who just did not understand and had no appreciation for the fact that someone outside of my race would carry a child, or that I would allow it to happen. And what I said to them, and what I would say to your audience, is that, when you are at the point, you may have a certain or preconceived notion about how you want things to look, or how you want something to develop, or how you want the story to be, period. And that just may not be the plan that God has for you and your story. It may come in an unconventional, you mentioned that word earlier, unconventional way, in a way that you never saw coming. And for me, I'm not, I don't know anyone else believes, but for me, God, I have a strong faith and belief in God. And so his timing is perfect timing. And when I look at what happened with me and my story, and I look at myself as Kimberly and then Heidi, who carried my little black son, whom I love dearly, I look at where we are right now in our country, and like I said, world. And it's just, the timing couldn't be more perfect, which is why I wanted to write my book and talk about it, because it's just an on-time story. And, so that, to me, like in terms of who carried my child, once people have the backdrop and they have the, more knowledge of what happened, then they just are like, oh my goodness, I had no idea, whatever. And so you'll see a lot of that. If you read the book too, you'll see a lot of that, where even the people at the front desk of the doctor's office, Black women who were just incensed that I was walking in with Heidi. And so that, that is
It's hurtful.
Yeah, it is. It's hurtful. But it's just, still, once people have an understanding, then it's different. And I will say this last thing, that when you are dealing with infertility, your end goal is, I want to be a mom. I want to be someone's mother, someone calling me mommy. That's what you want. You want it. And it doesn't have to be that you go through surrogacy. It could be adoption. It could be where you become the best mom ever, to maybe, you marry someone, they have children, and their child they think of you as just everything. So you still become a mom that way. And so it does not necessarily have to be that you carry the child. You can become a mom in so many different ways. And so I get it. And for me, this was just my journey to ultimately have a son, and it was through surrogacy.
Yeah. Well, I hope that your story will definitely, and I know that it probably will, for them, have great impact. Like you were saying just a minute ago, especially with the state of our continent and country. And there's, I tell people all the time, you just have to be open-minded when you go into assisted reproductive care and or any other path to parenthood. You just have to be really open-minded and look for the signs and wonders. Look for
Signs and wonders.
the
Yes.
unconventional ways of doing it, and forget what everybody else has to say about it. It matters from when we're talking about our loved ones, but then again, it doesn't, because you're going through it, you're paying for it,
Yes.
and it's your
Yeah,
life.
exactly.
It's your life.
I, you
So.
know, I was watching, there was like a, Housewives of Atlanta, and Candy Burris, she used a surrogate for her daughter. And I remember my son was already here, but I remember her husband saying something like, surrogacy, like, black people don't do like use their something to that point of black
Hmm.
people don't use their. And so I'm telling you, that was something where I just chuckled when I heard him make that comment or whatever. So one day if I
Yeah.
ever meet them, I'm gonna be like, yeah, we do use surrogates, you know.
Yep. Yes. And I think we just got to stop using terminology like that. It's so
Yeah, yeah,
confining. It's so
yeah,
confining, and it doesn't leave room for much else to come in, and for God
exactly.
and universe and all of our ancestors to bring our blessings to us, because what you wouldn't have your son, the who he is today, without
Exactly.
it. And so I think it's a blessing, and I know that Heidi will continue to be blessed, and you guys will be too as well moving forward. So tell us where we can find you and also your book, and I'll make sure that I have it in show details for everyone to tap and go.
Oh, absolutely. You can follow me, like I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It's under the Colorless Womb underscore. So the Colorless Womb underscore is I want to underscore it for infertility. I want to underscore the Colorless Womb. So yeah, that's how you can find me. Can email me at the colorless womb dot com. You can look up the website and see information about me, and then also interviews that I've done on that website. So yeah, that's how you can find me. And if you want to purchase the book, which would be amazing, you
Hmm.
can find it on Amazon, on Google. I'm sorry, Amazon and Apple iTunes, and also Barnes and Noble. You can find the book.
Wonderful.
Colorless Womb.
Wonderful. Well,
Mm-hmm.
thank you again, Kimberly, for being here and
Thank
sharing your
you.
story. It was just absolutely a pleasure and very enlightening for me as well.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, I just appreciate it. I appreciate it so much that your willingness to share and to advocate for all of us. Thank you. I appreciate you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
having
You're
me.
welcome. Pleasure is mine. And thank you, friends, for tuning in to another episode of Infertility and Me podcast. You guys know where to find me. Peace and blessings.